Hello everyone, today we are diving deep into a story that changed the world forever, the creation of the atomic bomb. This is not just a tale of science and war, but also of morality, political intrigue, and one man's rise and fall. Robert J. Oppenheimer, the father of atomic bomb. We will also explore the monumental role of the Manhattan Project, the terrifying decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, and how the world entered the nuclear age. Along the way, we will also look into Oppenheimer's post war controversies, particularly how he was later accused of being a traitor, with the shadow of the Cold War looming over him. So grab your headphones, settle in, and let's explore how the atomic bomb came into existence and the complicated legacy of the man who led its creation. Let's begin with the origin of atom bomb. So let's rewind to the late 1930s. The world was on the brink of a new war, and at the same time, something groundbreaking was happening in the world of physics. Scientists just had discovered nuclear fission, the process wherein atoms' nucleus split, releasing an immense amount of energy. This discovery was crucial because it demonstrated that it was theoretically possible to create an explosive device far more powerful than any conventional bomb. Two scientists, Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, were among the first to realize the potential danger this posed if a countries like Nazi Germany got its hand on such a technology. In 1939, they wrote a letter to the President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning him that Germany might be developing a nuclear weapon. This letter was the spark that ignited what would later be called the Manhattan Project. By 1942, with the US now deeply involved in the World War II, the race to build an atomic bomb was officially on. The Manhattan Project was in a massive top secret program with the sole purpose of developing the world's first nuclear weapon before the Germans. It brought together some of the greatest scientist minds of the time, including American, British, Canadian scientists. This project was so secret that even the Vice President Harry S. Truman didn't know about it until after Roosevelt's death. The work began in earnest, and it was clear that this was not going to be just another weapon. It was going to redefine warfare and geopolitics for generations to come. And one of the most crucial figures in this story was Robert J. Oppenheimer, a theoretical physicist who became the scientist or a scientific director of the Manhattan Project, often referred to as the father of atomic bomb. Oppenheimer's leadership was a key to the project's success. But Oppenheimer was not your typical scientist. He had a deep interest in philosophy, poetry, and ancient texts, which often influenced his outlook on life and science. He was an intellectual but also a deeply complicated man, aware of the moral implications of what he was creating. Oppenheimer and his team were stationed at Los Alamos in New Mexico. It is a remote location in the deserts of New Mexico, where they worked in isolation to solve the problem of how to control a nuclear chain reaction. The task was complex and dangerous too, but the stakes were clear. If they did not build the bomb first, the world could fall under Hitler's control. This urgency drove their work. By mid 1945, the team had developed bombs design, and the first ever nuclear test was set out on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico's desert. This test was codenamed Trinity. So the official name of the test was the Trinity test. When the bomb exploded, it unleashed a force equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT, something no one had ever witnessed. before. As Oppenheimer watched the explosion, he famously recalled a line from the Bhagavad Gita in an Hindi, or it's in an ancient Hindu scripture, not Hindi. Now I am become death, the destroyer of the worlds. This moment marked the beginning of nuclear age. But the test was only the beginning. Now the US government had to decide whether and how to use this weapon of unimaginable power. As World War II dragged on, Japan remained the last Axis power still fighting. Despite devastating losses, the Japanese government refused to surrender. The US had two choices: invade Japan, which would likely cost hundreds of thousands of American and Japanese lives, or use the newly developed atomic bomb to force a quick end to the war. The committee was formed to choose target for the bomb. Several cities were considered, including Kyoto, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. Kyoto, however, was eventually spared. The US Secretary of War Henry Stimson had a personal fondness for Kyoto because of its rich cultural heritage. He argued that destroying such an important historical and cultural city would only create long lasting bitterness and resentment against the United States. Instead, the military focused on cities with more strategic value. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki were chosen because they were industrial hubs, housing factories that produced war materials, and they had military importance too. Additionally, these cities had largely been untouched by conventional bombing, which would allow the US to measure the full impact of the atomic bomb. But it's essential to remember that these cities were not just military targets, they were home to hundreds of thousands of civilians. On August 6, 1945, the first bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima. The devastation was beyond comprehension. Around 80,000 people were killed instantly, and tens of thousands more dead in the following weeks from burns, radiation, sickness, and other injuries. 3 days later, on August 9, the second bomb, nicknamed was Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki too, killing around 40,000 people instantly. The exact number of the casualties from both bombing is hard to calculate because of the long-term effect of radiation exposure. These bombing were horrific, right? These bombing were too horrific, but they did achieve the desired outcome. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, bringing World War II in end. However, the ethical and moral implication of the using atomic bomb on civilian population continue to be debated to this day. While the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki marked the end of World War II, they also marked the beginning of Cold War. The United States had demonstrated its nuclear superiority, but it was not long before other nations sought to develop their own atomic bombs. In 1949, just 4 years after the US dropped its bomb on Japan, the Soviet Union successfully tested its own atomic bomb. This event shocked American government, which had believed it would take the Soviet at least a decade to develop nuclear weapon. The Soviet test marked the start of global nuclear arms race. With two superpowers now possessing nuclear weapons, the world entered a dangerous era where the threat of nuclear war was constant. The successful Soviet test also brought Oppenheimer into controversy. He was one of the scientists who had initially opposed the development of the more powerful nuclear weapons like the hydrogen bomb. Some people in the United States government suspected the Oppenheimer's previous associations with communists made him sympathetic to the Soviet cause, even though there was no solid evidence to support this. This suspicions would come back to haunt him in the coming years. After the war, Oppenheimer's story took a dramatic turn. Despite being hailed as a hero for his role in the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer's relation with the US government soared quickly. The main reason for this was his outspoken opposition to the development of hydrogen bomb, a weapon far more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During the early years of the Cold War, when tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were at an all-time high, Oppenheimer argued against an arms race and called for international control of nuclear weapons. He believed that creating more destructive bombs would only lead to global catastrophe. This stance put him at odds with peoples like Edward Teller, a fellow physicist who strongly supported the development of the hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer's earlier political associations also became a major issue. In the 1930s, he had interacted with the members of the Communist Party, including his wife and brother. Although Oppenheimer himself denied being a communist, these connections made him a target during a Red Scare, when fear of communist infiltration ran high in the United States. In 1954, Oppenheimer was called before a secret government hearing where he was accused of being a security risk. He was questioned about his past associations with communists and his opposition to the hydrogen bomb. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked, effectively ending his career in the government science. This event was a personal and professional tragedy for Robert J. Oppenheimer, who had dedicated so much of his life to the Manhattan Project and the defense of his country. For decades, Oppenheimer's reputation remained tainted by the accusations. However, in 2022, more than a half a century after his death, around it took 55 years, the US government officially cleared Oppenheimer's name, stating that charges against him had been politically motivated. This long-delayed recognition was a bittersweet moment, acknowledging the injustices he faced in his later years. So, as we look back on Robert Oppenheimer's life, we see a man who was both a brilliant scientist and a tragic figure. He led the creation of the most powerful weapon in human history, only to later question the morality of that creation and face persecutions of his beliefs. His story is a reminder of the complex relationship between science, ethics, and politics, especially in times of war. The atomic bomb fundamentally changed the world, bringing about end of the World War II, but also ushering in an era of fear and uncertainty. Oppenheimer's legacy, much like the bomb itself, right, is both a source of awe and caution. As we move further into the nuclear age, we are still grappling with the consequences of the decisions made during those fateful years. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. I hope this podcast has given you a deeper understanding of the event and people behind the atomic bomb and long-lasting impact they have had on the world. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning. Thanks for watching and listening.